This is Jade Abisham with KHTS Radio doing an interview with Miss Judy Collins, who is a legendary songwriter. Those of you who might be familiar with her landmark 1967 album, Wildflowers. How are you doing today, Judy?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Now, we are talking today because you recently released a brand new album, and this one's a little bit special here. It's your first album with all your own songs. Tell me, what inspires you to write, and what comes first, the music or the words?
Well, the first thing that I had was a lot of poetry, time to write it, and then the pandemic took over, so I just dug into the songs that were in process and managed to finish them. It's called Spellbound, and it's in in all of the different places you can find it, and it is all my own writing, which is very exciting.
Excellent. Now, one of the songs is When I Was a Girl in Colorado. It's absolutely captivating in terms of imagery. I was listening to it earlier today. Was this song something you wrote while you were in Colorado or when you were reminiscing about your time there?
Well, I was raised there and spent a lot of time there, and it comes to me as though it were a dream. And I wrote it, of course, in New York City, which is where I live. But I do spend time in Colorado, and I do think about it a great deal because that was the time of my growing up. They say sometimes, a painter, a friend of mine, Jules Zalitsky, he said, if you live till you're 20, you have enough material for a lifetime of creative work, and I suppose that's very true. Because a lot of our work is certainly that comes up out of dreams and reveries and writing in our journals and all kinds of things like that.
How does that compare? Your first song was Since You've Asked. How has your writing process changed to evolve into a full album of your own writing for Spellbound?
Well, I think since then, since 1967, when I started writing songs, maybe at the end of 66, my first three songs were on an album called, which you mentioned before, Wildflowers. The first three songs I wrote were on that album. And from then on, from 1966, I've always been writing songs. I'll take time off or set aside periods of time in my day, or at one point I took a few months off just to write songs. And most recently since I started writing songs with Ari Hess and had an album of duets with him and the songs we'd written, in 2017 it came out. And since then I'm always writing, and I always have songs of mine on albums, but I just never had this many. I never had a dozen of my own songs on an album before.
Yeah, you've done a lot of work with some quite famous names nowadays, like Joni Mitchell, Leonard Cohen. But at the time, at least of your first album, they were not household names yet. So you've definitely come in contact with a lot of people who are now very important in the industry. You mentioned Ari Hess, the song Spellbound on your album. It's a co-write with Ari Hess, correct?
Well, it's not really a co-write with him, but he sings on it. And so I often say to myself, he must have inspired it in some way.
You also collaborated with him on a Silver Skies Blue. So what is it like working with Ari?
Oh, he's brilliant. He's a brilliant writer, a wonderful performer. And I've known him for about almost 10 years now. Sometimes we get to sing together in shows and do some concerts together. And I always I don't know that I've ever found anybody that I sing as well with as I do with Ari. I haven't really sung with a lot of people. I've done a couple of duets. I did a duets album starting with one that he and I sang, which he wrote, called Strangers Again. And then I put a number of other guys together with me and did a number of duets with Michael McDonald and Jackson Browne and Willie Nelson. And that was a lot of fun. But I don't know that singing with anybody other than Ari has been as long-term as it has been now.
So what is it that appeals to you about his writing or singing style?
It has a kind of personal approach to it that I like a lot. That's not always true, I think, with many singers, but with him it is, and it fits into my own thinking about and feeling about songs.
Well, that's always nice to find somebody you can actually meet up with mentally and emotionally when you're trying to work collaboratively. So that's good to hear. So let's
Yeah,
move on to
it's
talk.
really perfect.
Let's move on to talk about your new podcast, which is called Since You've Asked. You had some great guests on like Jack Holzman, Julia Cameron, Jeff Daniels, and so on. What's it like hosting that podcast?
Oh, it's so much fun. You know, one of the ones that's coming out is Clive Davis, and Clive and I have known each other for 60 years, but I've never been a client of his. So it was, I go to his parties, I know him socially, and he put me together a couple of years ago with Joni Mitchell so that she could hear me sing both sides now. And it was great fun to do that. So I've known Clive, and I was able to talk to him in a way that was, I think, for him a little fresh. And so I asked him, at one point I asked him, who's the one who got away? And he said, well, it's a very good question because most people ask me who I fired. And the answer to my question was really intriguing. He said it was Harry Chapin.
Oh.
And the funny thing was that the head of my label, Elektra, was the person that let's say paid a higher price for Harry than Clive was willing to come up with. So he went from Columbia to Elektra, where he stayed put until his unfortunately early death.
Wow. So how did this podcast really come about?
Well, it was the pandemic. There was time on our hands. I learned to do Zoom. My manager and I talked about it, and I said, well, why don't we do that? What's fun? I love talking. I love socializing. I have a lot of time in my life where I spend talking to friends, both in and out of the business. And so it made a lot of sense. And, you certainly get to know somebody better when you do a podcast with them.
For certain. Now I'm going to go off a little script a little bit here, and I'm going to ask you a question. You've done a lot of work over the years. Do you have a specific song or a specific album of yours that is your favorite, either to perform or to hear people talk about?
I have been known to do Amazing Grace, of course, which I recorded in 1969, and I still sing it in concerts. I think it's a powerful and kind of a personal reflection in spiritual terms, and I think people pick up on that. So I would say that that's something that I've sung more than almost any other song, and that I feel a lot of connection with.
Perfect. All right, coming up, talking about the concert this weekend, what songs can we expect to hear at your concert here in Santa Clarita?
Well, I think, of course, that I'll be doing Amazing Grace, but I'll do the familiars. I'll do Send in the Clowns and Someday Soon and some of the new songs from Spellbound.
Is there anything in particular you'd like the audience to look forward to or keep an eye out for?
Oh, well, I just love to be there and with my audiences, and it's an exciting thing for me to be able to do, and I'm still doing it.
All right, perfect. Is there anything else you'd like to add or you'd like us to talk about?
No, thanks so much, and I appreciate your calling, and I'm looking forward to the show.
Excellent. Thank you so much. It was so nice to talk to you. That is the lovely singer-songwriter Judy Collins, who is set to perform at the Santa Clarita Performing Arts Center later this month. Please head on over to Hometown Station for more info.